Pierre Poilievre tonight, everyone. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for coming. My name is I'm the Member of Parliament for Kildonan and St. Paul. That's the northern suburbs of Winnipeg. Is anyone from the northern suburbs of Winnipeg today? Wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming. And I am Pierre's Shadow Minister for Public Safety. And I am honored to introduce him to you all this evening. He's a very special guest. We're very honored to have him back in Winnipeg. Many of you may have been in other rallies. Anyone been to his other rallies? Yeah. Well, welcome back. And I have to say, in the years that I've been an MP, I have never seen the Conservative Party more united, more inspired, more fired up and determined to defeat Justin Trudeau than ever before.
Yeah.
Pierre's going to talk to you about a lot of things that are important to all of you tonight. And of course, we know that Pierre led the way about talking about inflation. He called this years ago, when Justin Trudeau was spending record and historic amounts of your tax dollars, those deficit dollars. He called it. He said it was going to cause a cost of living crisis, inflation that we haven't seen in 40 years. He told everybody that, and now we see that coming to fruition. It's hurting Canadians more than ever. This used to be a country where you can work hard, get a home, provide for your kids, and retire in dignity. And Justin Trudeau is taking that away from Canadians. And Pierre is leading the fight to defeat him on that, and we know that he will. He also is a father of two and a husband. And he cares deeply about the safety of our communities, as we all do. And yet, under Justin Trudeau, after 7.5 years, we've seen a 32% increase in violent crime, 92% increase in gang murders. Last year, there was 124,000 more violent crimes in Canada than in 2015 when Justin Trudeau first formed government. It is serious. And Pierre Poilievre is leading the way on talking about that and talking about the impact of how Justin Trudeau's soft on crime policies are deeply impacting our communities. So you're going to hear a lot about these are big issues, these are important issues to all of us. He's here to share his bold vision for the country. And I've got to know Pierre over the last number of years, and I've learned a lot from him. And I have to say, folks, this guy is the real deal. He has courage, he has intelligence, he is brave. To take on the bias we see in the media. He has what it takes, the guts and the courage to take on the Laurentian elites who are trying to tell you how to live your lives. This is a once-in-a-lifetime leader, and we're very blessed to have him lead our party. And I'm very honored to introduce to you all the Honourable Pierre Poilievre. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Winnipeg. It's great to be back here in the prairies in God's country. Thank you for the warm welcome. Show for her incredible introduction. You know, she's serving as our Shadow Minister of Public Safety on Parliament Hill. And recently, I try to stay in Parliament often when this House is sitting so I can keep an eye on all these MPs and make sure they're behaving. I went away for 1 day, and Raquel Dancho accused a Liberal of lying and got kicked out of the House of Commons. I can't turn my back on you for 1 minute. Now you're encouraging her. She's going to get even more trouble. You know, it's funny. It's okay for the Liberals to lie in the House of Commons, but it's not okay for, I guess, for us to point it out, right? That's the rule. Now, some things are backwards. They don't answer any questions, even though it's called question period, right? It's not answer period. But you know, it is great to be back in Winnipeg. As you know, I grew up on the prairies, born and raised in Calgary, Alberta. Was born to a 16-year-old unwed mother who didn't have her. She had just lost her own mom, so she put me up for adoption to 2 school teachers from Saskatchewan. Yeah, my mom's from Saskatoon. My dad's from a little town called Leoville. Anybody heard of Leoville? Yeah. C'est un petit village franc-saskois, village francophone. Oui, où mon père parlait français quand il était très jeune. Il a essayé de transmettre le français à moi et mon frère. On a beaucoup de francophones dans les prairies, donc nous sommes fiers et nous serons ici pour toujours. On va protéger l'héritage francophone de l'Ouest canadien, n'est-ce pas? We're going to protect, absolutely. But, you know, my folks, when they adopted me, raised me just like everyone else, they always taught me, though, that it didn't matter where I came from. It mattered where I was going. It didn't matter who I knew, but what I could do. And that is the country I want my children to inherit. That's the country.
Right.
That's the country that attracted my wife to Canada. She was born in Venezuela, and they fled as refugees. Her father worked in a bank there. When he got to Montreal in a working class, tough neighborhood, he had to start all over. Hopped on the back of a pickup truck every morning, drive out to a farm field and pick fruit. He knew that was tough work, but for him, there was no greater dignity than to provide for one's family. And now, he's a part owner in a pharmacy. He's got rental properties. He's very successful. And that's the Canadian dream, the belief that if you work hard, it doesn't matter where you started off, you can climb as high as the dream can imagine taking you. That's the wonder of what Canada. But lately, people feel like that dream has melted away into despair. Increasingly, people feel trapped. I meet young people all the time who have no idea how they're going to move forward. They live in tiny 400 square foot apartments because they can't afford anything better. Worse, they often live in their parents' basements, now well into their 30s. I was in Vancouver a while back and I asked, if you are 35 still living in your parents' basement, how do you bring home a date? And a lady in the crowd said, very carefully. When I was a kid, it was through the side window, but don't tell another that. But seriously, how do you start a family? Build home equity, collateral, or credit history if you can't buy a home?
Move to Manitoba.
Move to Manitoba. Oh, we've got a real estate agent in the crowd. He's definitely on commission, that's for sure. But, you know, our young people feel like they can't move ahead no matter how hard they work. Single moms put water in their kids' milk because food prices are up 11% year over year. Here in Canada, where we have the fourth most farmland per capita of any nation on earth, people can't afford to gas their vehicles. And we now have more serious problems than that. 1.5 million people ate at a food bank in 1 month last year here in Canada. One food bank CEO even reported that she's getting people coming in asking for help with medical assistance in dying. Not because they're sick, but because they're too poor to live a happy life. Meanwhile, our veterans, who are denied the basic treatment to which they are entitled, are advised by government bureaucrats that maybe they should just consider ending their lives as well. And why wouldn't the bureaucrats think that was okay when now their prime minister is putting forward a bill that would propose medical assistance in dying as a solution to mental illness? Shame on him is right.
Shame.
Here in Canada, in a country where 30,000 people have died of drug overdoses in the last 7 years alone. And the same sleazy companies that brought those opioids into Canada by lying about their addictiveness and lethality are not only getting off scot-free, are now landing juicy federal government contracts. Companies like McKinsey, which advised on how to lie to the medical system and get people hooked on these drugs, while our people lie face first, overdosing on the streets of our country. These companies make off like bandits, profiting off of the generosity of the Liberal government. You see, not everybody is doing badly in Canada today. There is a privileged few that profit off the powerful and their profit off the influence and the connections they have to an increasingly powerful and concentrated government. You know that the amount of money spent on contracting for high-paid consultants has gone up from $10 billion to $17 billion, a 70% increase in the amount of money paid out to those consultants. We spend $17 billion on that. There are 15 million households in Canada. That means the average household is spending $1,000 in federal taxes just to pay for consultants now in Justin Trudeau's Canada. So not everybody's doing badly. There is a small elite, a little aristocracy that is doing better and better as the wealth is concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. That is Justin Trudeau's Canada. Meanwhile, he stands aside as though he's just an observer to all the misery that is unfolding in the country that he has now led for 7 years. He says he's not responsible for any of it. He has no control over these failures. Well, if he has no control over it, why is he in the job? Why doesn't he go do something else? Why don't we put him on a one-way ticket to Hollywood so he can go be a Hollywood actor? The truth is there's a lot of hurt in this country, but there is good news. We are going to transform that hurt into hope. We're going to put people back in charge of their lives and restore Canada as the freest nation anywhere on earth. That is our purpose. We're going to tackle Trudeau's inflation. Here's how. We know why we have the inflation. The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits have bid up the goods that we buy and the interest that we pay. More and more taxes, like the carbon tax, drive up food. I think there's a little munchkin here who's worried about the size of the national debt. That's why they cry in Canada when they come out of the womb, eh? I'm not paying that, send me back. Anyway, where was I? I'm a little ADD today, I'm sorry about that. But, you know, it's pretty basic stuff. When you have $500 billion more bidding up goods, you're going to have higher prices, right? And that's what we have right now in Canada. So we're going to rein in government spending, bring in a dollar for dollar law that requires the government find equal savings for any new spending. They brought this in the United States back in the 1990s, capped government spending, forced politicians to live by the same laws of scarcity as everyone else. The result was they balanced the budget, paid off $400 billion in debt, but as soon as that law lapsed, America went right back into deficit where it's remained for the 2 decades that have followed since, proving again that politicians need legal restraints on their spending or they will spend more and more and more. Why? Because they don't have to live by the same laws of scarcity of every other creature in the universe. The birds in the trees, the fish in the seas, they have to maximize the use of limited resources, but not politicians. They just pass it on in more debt, more taxes, and more inflation. Well, this law will cap that spending. We will cut the waste in the government. We'll cut back the high-priced consultants. We'll cap the size of the bureaucracy. And we'll be very targeted in finding savings. Like, for example, how about we defund the CBC?
Yeah, let's do that. Do that.
You know, the wokesters over at the CBC, they always love to criticize everyone else, and they love to divide people along race. 500 employees at the CBC wrote a letter saying that the CBC is systematically racist in how it covers the news media. So why are we giving $1.4 billion to a racist organization, right? I'll tell you something, when I'm Prime Minister, we're going to do a full investigation, not only into the waste and mismanagement, but also into the racism of the CBC executives and why they've been able to get away with it.
Right on.
Cut back on the corporate welfare, and the powerful insiders that continually get the contracts will ensure that dollars reach directly to the people on the ground, the hardworking people who pay the taxes, instead of just going to the upper crust and the elite and the high-level executive bureaucracy. We're going to transform government so that it actually delivers results for the money it spends, rather than just being gobbled up by the interest groups and the insiders on Parliament Hill. More and more taxes have failed to deliver you better services. Look, they've increased the size of the public service by 30,000. Can you get a pass? Dollars to the federal government will depend on how many houses you actually get built, how many keys and doors. So that will incentivize them to remove the delays and the high costs of red tape so that the builders can build. And we're also going to require that every federally funded transit station have high-density housing located all around it so our young people don't even need to own a car. And I'm going to sell off 15% of the federal buildings, 37,000 federal buildings, many of them completely empty now. We'll sell them off, we'll turn them into housing, and it just warms my heart to think of a beautiful family pulling up in their U-Haul to move in their wonderful new home in the former headquarters of the CDC.
Yes.
And you know, a nation to be self-sufficient needs to be able to produce its own food, right? You know, here we are in Canada importing food from the rest of the world, because our government actually attacks our farmers with fertilizer rules and high import taxes on fertilizer and other inputs, and of course a carbon tax that makes it more expensive to dry, to fertilize, and to transport food off farm with higher expenses, which means we just drive the production to other places. You know, I'll give you an example. There's a beautiful little greenhouse in my ride called Suntech Tomatoes. They produce the little miracles of Manitoba. Beautiful little tomatoes. But the government charges them a carbon tax of the CO2 they release into the greenhouse, even though that CO2 is absorbed by the plant life. Apparently the Liberals missed that day in science class. So anyway, the result is that it's more expensive to buy a Manotick tomato in Manotick than a Mexican tomato in Manotick, right? Because they don't have the same high carbon tax down in Mexico. So what's the price signal telling the customer to do? Well, to buy the Mexican tomato that had to be transported by truck and train, burning diesel fuel all the way across North America and polluting our atmosphere, driving production out and pollution up. That's exactly the opposite of what we were supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be thinking locally, right? What happened to the 100-mile diet? Well, you can't do that if you drive farm production abroad. So we're going to get rid of the carbon tax to lower the cost for you and your family, but also make Canada the best place to grow food.
Yeah.
You want to reduce emissions, you don't do it by driving up the cost of traditional energy. You do it by driving down the cost of carbon-free alternatives. We need to build more hydroelectric dams in this country so that we can produce emissions-free electricity. We need to we need to develop nuclear energy. We have the biggest supply of civilian-grade uranium right next door in Saskatchewan. Nuclear plants will give us the baseload electrical power that can power the future. And at the same time, you want to have electric cars? What's the point of having an electric car if you're using batteries that were produced burning coal in China? It's kind of the opposite of what the electric car is supposed to achieve, right? We have lithium in Canada. In 2020, we produced zero, not a single tablespoon of this stuff. Here, I know that doesn't make sense, does it?
I'm angry. Get fed up.
We've got a heckler in the house here. Future member of Parliament. This little one's learning from Raquel Danshall. You know, we can produce these minerals right here in Canada instead of importing them from abroad. And it's not just minerals from the ground, it's natural gas. We have 300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in Canada. But Justin Trudeau has not succeeded in completing a single export terminal for that gas, even though there were 15 of them proposed when he became Prime Minister. And today again, he's promising the Japanese president, he's going to look into whether we can get some natural gas out the door, right? He said 7 years. There were 15 proposals. 0 have been completed. Instead, he claims he's going to be exporting boatloads of hydrogen for vehicles that don't get run on hydrogen, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so basically, here's the plan. We're going to repeal his anti-energy laws. We're going to produce natural gas. We're going to liquefy it at the coast by reducing its temperature to minus 161 degrees Celsius, put it on a ship, send it to Asia to close the Asian coal-fired plants. We're going to send it to Europe to supply the Europeans with Canadian natural gas so that we can break the dependence on Putin and take dollars for dictators and turn them into paychecks for our people. people in this country. And by the way, speaking of standing up for the people of this country, next week I gather there's a bunch of hoity-toities that are going to a place called Davos. I want to tell you, there will not be a single solitary Conservative member of Parliament. They'll be in their ridings working with their people in this country.
Freeland can stay there. Stay with
Stand up for
Schwab.
the common people, including law-abiding firearms owners in Canada, right?
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau would have you believe that a bunch of hunters from Dauphin or from Labrador are headed into downtown Toronto to shoot up the streets, right? But not before they go out and lawfully get a possession and acquisition license and follow all the safe storage and transportation rules and inform the firearms officer of their plans to transport the firearm into downtown Toronto. They'll follow all the rules before they go to rob the bank, right? Forgetting that 82% of all the guns used in crime actually come smuggled from the United States of America. So what if instead of blowing billions of dollars trying to chase down hunting rifles from indigenous people, farmers, and hunters, what if we use that money to reinforce our borders, to toughen the laws to put the real violent criminals behind bars, and to free up some money to provide drug treatment so that we can save the lives of the many brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors who are hooked on drugs? Wouldn't that be a better way to protect the public? We're going to stand on the side of the law-abiding people and their freedoms. That includes the freedom of speech. You know, just last week we heard that a licensing body for the Ontario College of Psychologists say they want to force Jordan Peterson into a social media training program. Retraining, that's right. Sorry, I sometimes I lose track of the Soviet terminology.
Crazy.
Right, thank you for the retraining. So apparently, among his crimes is the fact that he retweeted something I said. He did retweet.
Yeah.
So, and then he actually had the temerity to criticize the Prime Minister. Can you imagine? You would think for a second here that we lived in a democracy where our citizens are welcome to criticize people in power. But now we have occupational licensing bodies mandated by the government telling people what they can and can't say and threatening to take away their license and their livelihood and practice in this country. Listen, you don't have to like everything Jordan Peterson has to say, right? You don't like it. Debate him. Good luck with that. That's your right. That's a democracy. You see, there's a difference between hate speech and speech you hate, right? There's a lot of speech Justin Trudeau hates. He hates anyone who criticizes his woke agenda, anyone who points out his corruption, anyone in his own caucus that points to his hypocrisy. We all remember what he did to Jody Wilson-Raybould when she dared stand in his way as he tried to grant immunity to a large liberal-linked multinational corporation that had stolen $100 million from the poorest people in Africa. He threw her out of the Liberal cabinet and caucus because he did not want to have any of that kind of criticism. But here's the bad news for him and the good news for us. In a free country, it is the right, it is the duty of patriotic citizens to stand up and speak up when they don't like what they see. And that is exactly, in this case, what Dr. Peterson did. And that is why he is being silenced. Like so many other people, the government is trying to silence criticism with this new law, Bill C-11, that would censor what you see and say on the internet. And the only reason that law has yet to pass is because conservative members of parliament, conservative senators are fighting tooth and nail to stop it. We believe that you should allow for ideas to clash and the best ones to rise to the top, for people to have vigorous debate, disagreement. That's how decisions are made in a democracy. And some of the liberal elites say, I need to stop being so critical of Justin Trudeau, right? They forget my job is to be the leader of the opposition, His Majesty's loyal opposition. Some people find it ironic that loyal and opposition go in the same sentence, but it is not an accident. In fact, it is designed precisely that way for a reason. Because our system is predicated on the notion that opposition to the powerful and the crown, actually, is a form of loyalty to the country, because it forces the ministers and the decision makers to remember who they work for, to act very carefully and to think carefully before they do anything that acts against the public interest, right? That there's a disincentive and a deterrent for bad behavior by powerful people. The House of Commons was not meant to be a quiet place. You know, I was complaining about the heckling earlier on. It's part of the deal, right? We don't have a half circle in the House of Commons. We have two sides. It is meant to be uproarious, loud, frustrating. That is our parliamentary system. It has been that way for hundreds of years. It is meant to make the most powerful people in the land tremble when they walk in the doors, for the mighty to be made low. It is the house of the common people. It is not the house of the kings and queens. In fact, do you know the only people who are not allowed on the floor of the House of Commons? The king and the governor general, because it is not a place for royalty. Why do you think the color is green? Because the first commoners met in the fields of Runnymede in England. They were the common people. They were the ones that brought the value from the field, that brought in the crop. And they were the ones who fought progressively and over many centuries to take the power away from the crown and give it to the people. That is what the House of Commons is for. The Prime Minister, prime, first, minister, servant. Minister means servant. The Prime Minister is the first servant. He is not the master. And the org chart, let's remember how the org chart actually works. It's not Prime Minister, Cabinet, MPs, people. It's people, members of Parliament, Cabinet, Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is meant to serve the people. The people have sovereignty over their own nation. That's how this country works. You know, the greatest leaders of all time understood this. I'm reminded of Winston Churchill. And we think of Winston Churchill for the many witticisms, the clever things he said, the soaring rhetoric that took us through wars. But he understood that wars were not won by prime ministers and generals alone. They were won by the soldiers on the ground who fought them, and the citizens in our communities and neighborhoods who stood up and fought back themselves. And one of my favorite stories of Winston Churchill is one that is almost never told. He used to love to go out into the streets of London and help the people after they had been bombed out by the Nazi raids. And one day he went out with the rescue teams, and they found a little old lady who'd been buried under rubble. And they walked over and they started to scrape away all the rocks and debris. She'd been out shopping, and her shopping bags were still right next to her. And they scraped away all the rubble. She stood up and dusted herself off. She picked up her bags and she said, "Prime Minister, I'm sorry. I'd love to stand and talk, but I have things to do." And she marched on. She marched on. And his eyes filled with tears. And he looked at her and he said, "There goes greatness. There goes greatness." Because the real heroes are not the mighty leaders, the powerful bureaucrats, the central planners, all the experts who tell us how to live our lives. The real heroes are the moms and dads who are out of bed at 6 in the morning with a screaming child. The real heroes are the police officers who stand in front of bullets so that we don't have to take them. The real heroes are the farmers who work our fields, the truckers who deliver our goods and services. The real heroes are the common people, the everyday people who make the sacrifices, who never get the glory, who are never on television, for whom the trumpets never sound. Those are the real heroes that win the battles of every great country. those are the people that we are working for. Those are the people on whose side we will fight every single day. And in the words of a great prairie populist Prime Minister, John Diefenbaker, I am a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to worship God in my own way, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all of mankind. Thank you very much. God bless Winnipeg.
Yeah! Woo! Right on.
Don't let everybody think of that. We're ready. We're not quite done for tonight. There's going to be, he's going to line up for a photo booth and a photo line outside, but just hang on. He's got to get in position. So we're going to kill some time here. So I'm Dan Mazur, Member of Parliament for Dauphin Swan River W.E.F. Shadow Minister for Rural Economic Development and Connectivity, which is a big issue in itself. And I'm going to take a minute to introduce my colleagues, Larry McGuire, Brandon Seward, Ted Paul, James Zam, of course, you all met Raquel Dancho already.